Hi, I'm Devina.
Hi, I'm Shreya, and we're part of the forensics team at Project 39A, National Law University, Delhi.
And today we'll be talking about forensics and its application in the criminal justice system.
Can you tell us what is meant by forensics? Say if you were to explain it to non-experts.
So, forensics is the use of science for the purpose of law. As forensic scientists, we aid the investigative process. We don't claim who is the convict, we don't solve crimes, we simply collect the evidence and examine it. Anything else is beyond the realm of forensic science.
Is forensics just one field or are there various kinds?
So, as science has different streams like physics, chemistry, botany, zoology, it's the same thing with forensic science. Different types of evidence that are found at the crime scene will require different types of scientific techniques. Like, for example, if you find bullet at a crime scene, you'll need ballistic techniques. If you find blood at a crime scene, there'll be serology, which is the identification of body fluids. Similarly, toxicology for poison identification or fingerprint, DNA profiling, cyber forensics, even wildlife forensics. So forensic science is this umbrella term. Under that, you have different forensic techniques that may be used.
Since forensic science is supposed to assist law, is there any guiding principle that defines this process? If so, how is this different from other sciences?
So forensic science is a subset of science. So definitely the same scientific principles apply here as well. When we talk about scientific inquiry, it's basically you observe the cause and effect, right? You observe certain phenomenon and then you come out with explanations or what like scientists like to call hypothesis to explain that phenomena, and through experimentation you're trying to figure out whether the explanation is correct or not, right? And what may happen at the end of this experimentations, the result will tell you that the explanation is right or it's wrong. So based on that you can change your hypothesis or you can tweak your experimentation a little bit. And when we talk about forensic science, it's exactly the same. We observe or examine the evidence based on techniques that have this cause and effect, wherein we understand what the result will be and what that result means, right? So, for example, let's look at a crime scene where you have serological evidence, right, which is the identification of body fluids. There's a test known as spot test that's done, wherein the scientific principle is that certain types of body fluids in the presence of known chemicals will change their color. For example, at a crime scene, if a forensic expert sees something like a red spot, right, and they will do something known as a phenolphthalein test, which basically in the presence of hemoglobin, which is present in our blood, will change color to pink. Now, what also happens that iron, which is found in hemoglobin, is found in iron oxide, which is commonly known as rust, or even potato juice for that matter. And phenolphthalein can change color to pink even in those cases, right?
So, how would the scientists then be sure that that was actually blood or not?
Exactly. Scientists cannot be sure, right? This is a presumptive test. Okay. So, for the scientists to actually confirm that this red spot was not rust or potato juice, they'll have to do confirmatory tests wherein they're conducting more chemical exams to conclusively say that this red spot is blood and nothing else. And no forensic scientist should actually give such conclusions without running these type of confirmatory tests.
What do Indian laws say about the use of forensic science in criminal proceedings?
So, Section 45 of the Indian Evidence Act allows courts to rely on expert opinion. And while discussing this section, courts have actually explained who an expert is and how they would be relying on their opinion. So, the definition of an expert as per courts is anyone who is specially skilled or has special knowledge in a particular area. And in the case of science, it would be a particular discipline of science. Courts have also said that expert opinion must always be supported by necessary data and materials. And to understand why the courts have said this, imagine a situation where the police actually finds an accused who has white powdery substance in their presence. And the police actually believes that this substance is an illegal drug. So what would they do next? I mean, they would seize that and they would send that to the laboratory for further testing. And they'll ask the lab to let them know whether it is any kind of illegal drug like cocaine or heroin. And the labs would then the scientists there would perform their experiments on that drug, and they'll take down different notations of that, right from the physical characteristics of it, what was the texture, the color, the weight, and how did that unknown substance respond when it was tested with known materials. Now, based on all of this, based on the scientific findings, the expert will prepare their report, and that report would be sent to the courts. Now, it depends on what kind of information the expert actually writes in that report, because it could be that the expert has just written and come to the conclusion that this substance, this white powdery substance, is actually cocaine. And if they do not write more about this, then the court would be left guessing the what were the bases on which the expert has arrived at this opinion.
Right. So think of it like a maths problem, right? Like when we were in school and our maths teacher always told us that please show your steps at how you've arrived at the result, right? And every step had a mark attached to it. So in this scenario, the maths teacher knew the answer, right? And he was checking whether we knew the steps and the result was not a fluke or we were not cheating. But look at the scenario in a criminal case, right? The courts don't know who is the accused. The lawyers don't know. The investigating agencies don't know. So we don't really know the right answer, so to speak. So the courts have to rely on the process that's been followed.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's important that as forensic scientists, we state every process that we have followed in arriving at a conclusion. Without stating that, it will be very difficult for the court to actually believe or rely on the result that we've given.
Yeah, and it's on the basis of this kind of explanation, which will be there in the report, that the court will then finally judge whether the opinion of the expert was accurate and whether it was precise. And if on the basis of that conclusion, they can come to a factual finding about whether that substance was actually cocaine or not.
Exactly.
Is expert evidence examined in the same way in other countries also?
Yes, so many common law jurisdictions look at expert opinion in the same way that India does. However, there are some key differences in terms of the way that this opinion comes into trial, the way it's recorded, as well as how courts would substantively scrutinize it. So, in terms of the procedure, we find that in many other countries, experts would normally come and testify as part of the trial process. And they will come and explain to the court what was the procedure that they followed, and that process will also allow the accused an opportunity to cross-examine them and see if all the processes got followed properly.
Right. So in India, we have government examiners or forensic scientists who come into court. Is it the same thing in other countries as well?
Yeah, so government examiners certainly is the norm, but what you also find in other jurisdictions is the concept of defense experts.
Right.
And that is where the accused would also take the opportunity to get their own expert before the court and try to explain what were the errors or the infirmities in the process that was followed by the government expert. And they would also probably show to the court that there is a different interpretation to the scientific findings that the government expert got. So the conclusion that they have come to is not necessarily correct.
So what is it that the courts are actually looking at?
So courts, what they're doing is that they're trying to check if the processes which have been followed, the scientific methods, the techniques, if those are the ones which the general scientific community also holds to be good. And this is where some of the litigation really happens, because as we know that there isn't any like in law there is no black and white. The same thing is with science is always developing, and by doing research studies we're trying to see whether a certain technique works or not. So what the courts are also trying to see is if the techniques which are being used in actual casework, are they reliable or not? Are they considered to be valid techniques as per the scientific community or not? And once the courts have done that determination, they will also look at whether those techniques, if these are established techniques, whether they have been followed correctly in that case itself, because that's also important, right? Like, why should we assume that that just because an established technique is being used, it would have been used properly in that case? So the courts will go into that kind of inquiry, and to do that, the courts will do a close examination of the laboratory documentation, and that will allow them to scrutinize exactly what the scientists did in the lab and whether they followed those processes properly.
What is it about the nature of criminal law and forensics that deem them so compatible or not compatible, in your opinion?
So, criminal law requires a lot of certainty. That's the entire trial process. What we're trying to see is whether the evidence, without a shadow of doubt, is pointing in the direction of the accused who is on trial, and you can say that it is only the accused who has committed this offense and no one else. So, this threshold of proof or of evidence that the court is requiring is actually supposed to be beyond reasonable doubt, as they say. And that means that no reasonable person would have a doubt that the accused has actually done the offense or not.
Let's take an example. Say in a crime scene, forensic scientists observe blood, right? They test it and do a blood grouping test, and the results comes back as B positive. And the accused in this case is also B positive. Given this scenario, can the court, solely based on this evidence, say that the accused was the one who committed the crime? Definitely not, right? Especially considering the fact that 38% of Indians are B positive. Does this meet the beyond reasonable doubt threshold? And of course, there are different scientific techniques, as I've discussed earlier, and their level of precision is different. DNA profiling definitely is more precise than blood grouping. But what we'll have to understand that all sciences have this limit, and none of them can reach that uniqueness or the individualization certainty that the courts demand.
Yeah, and I think that is why they say that forensic evidence should not be the sole piece of evidence in a criminal trial. It should always corroborate other pieces of evidence, because that level of certainty that the science can allow for is not something that will meet the legal standard.
Given the uncertainty, should it mean that forensic science should not be used as evidence?
No, that should not be the conclusion from all of this. If you compare forensic evidence with other pieces of evidence in a criminal trial, you might find that they are a lot more vulnerable to change or manipulation. But this is also not to say that forensic evidence cannot be manipulated or cannot be wrong. So we must recognize that it can also be error prone. So the inquiry that is done about forensic evidence, that is what becomes important. And there are different parts to this. First, we must look at whether the forensic technique which has been adopted is that fit for purpose, which is to say whether that technique actually answers the questions which are being asked. Secondly, we must look at whether the protocol or the technique, if it is done again, if it's repeated, will it give the same results, or will those results change? And more importantly, will those results change if someone else was to carry out that technique, if there was a different scientist who was working on this? So that is what should be looked at.
Irrespective of what or where or by whom any evidence is being examined, the result should be the same. Suppose blood is being examined by a forensic scientist in Delhi, the result should not be different if that forensic scientist were practicing it in Mumbai or it was a completely different forensic scientist. Science should be the same wherever it's practiced by whoever it's practiced by.
Yeah, and if that isn't the case, if the scientific results vary, then maybe the kind of even if they are considered as part of the criminal trial process, this factor that they are prone to change, that must definitely be known by the courts and must be considered before they give any weight to that evidence.
Absolutely.
How bad can it be if forensic evidence is not examined properly before being relied upon in court?
Well, the consequences can be really bad. If the courts rely upon faulty evidence, then the true perpetrator of the offense can actually go scot-free and an innocent person may actually be convicted. So, before relying on forensic evidence, the courts have to ensure that the evidence was collected properly by the police and the investigating authorities, that it was sent to the laboratories without any tampering or contamination, and that when the experts conducted experiments on that those experiments were done properly and they used reliable techniques to examine the evidence, and the conclusions that they arrive upon have been properly interpreted.
Exactly. Everybody has an important role to play in this. Imagine a factory, right? The end product of the factory is a result of all the instruments and the workers working together and in a proper manner, right? So in this factory where forensic evidence is, say, the end product, for it to be of good quality, for it to be relied upon in court, the investigating officers that bring in the raw material, so to speak, the evidence, they have to perform their function well. Obviously, the experiments done by the scientists to examine the evidence, they have to be reliable and valid. And even in court, the lawyers also have a role to play. They have to make sure that the evidence presented in court is presented well. And finally, the judge, who has a say on whether the evidence can actually be relied upon or not in this case. Everybody has this important role and they have to play it well so that reliable forensic science can be applied across all criminal cases fairly. At the end of the day, I think all of us really want a fair criminal justice system, and I think good forensic science can definitely help benefit the system.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, reliable forensic evidence can and certainly does lead to fairer and stronger convictions.
There is a popular notion that scientific evidence is absolutely infallible. What contributes to this idea that science is entirely foolproof and that its conclusions or findings couldn't possibly be erroneous?
Well, I think first of all, CID has a lot to contribute in this arena.
सर हम ये देखने की कोशिश कर रहे थे ये जो टायर मार्क्स है ना कौन कौन सी गाड़ियां हैं इसमें
देखो भाई एक कार तो एकदम छोटी है स्मॉल कार और दूसरी बीच के साइज की है एक कार बहुत पुरानी है कम से कम 30-40 हजार किलोमीटर चल चुकी होगी टायर एकदम घिस गए लेकिन फिर भी बंदे ने टायर बदले नहीं
क्या बात है सर मानना पड़ेगा सर आपकी नॉलेज है ना अरे फेंक रहे यार फेंक रहे
The way that media has generally portrayed forensic evidence, they show this to be this smoking gun which will always help you find the answer. And so that's why I would think that it's important that courts look at forensic evidence in the way that they would look at any other piece of evidence. They have to scrutinize it as closely.
Absolutely right. Media often portrays forensic science as this all-knowing science which can solve the unsolvable crime, right? What is often missed out is science has limitations and it can't always answer all questions. Science has limitations and so do the scientists.
So in this part, we thought we'll answer some of the frequently asked questions about forensic science. Is forensic science perfect?
No. Are there many disciplines within forensic science? Yes.
Can a forensic scientist be jack of all trades? Well, can a dentist do brain surgery?
Nah. Do forensic scientists solve crimes? No. We simply collect and examine the evidence. Anything else is beyond the realm of forensic science.
Is a match always a match? Forensic results are subject to scientific variables. Please read the laboratory documentation carefully before relying.
Are forensic scientists always right? No, they aren't our moms.
Is the responsibility only on the forensic scientists? Well, the police, the lawyers and the courts play a huge role as well in this entire process to ensure that only reliable forensic evidence is used.
What role should the state play? Well, the state has a huge role to play. They should be able to provide better infrastructure for the laboratories and definitely more resources for the laboratories and scientific research and training opportunities for the scientists themselves. Can the public help too?
Yes. I mean, first of all, do not believe everything that you see on CID.
अरे फेंक रहे यार फेंक रहे
Like with your schools and hospitals, demand better standards from the laboratories and better resources for the scientists themselves.
Should we trust forensic science? Yes, but only the law should be blind, not your faith.
Absolutely, and I think that's about it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video informative.
Yeah, and please do let us know if you'd like us to do more such videos in the future. And for more content on law and criminal justice related issues, please subscribe to the Project 39A YouTube channel. Thank you.